All right.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Testudo Times podcast. It's Ohio State week. I'm Pete Volk alongside Andrew Emmer and Dave Tucker. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really great. Maryland is about to play ball, and it feels great.
Dave, how about you?
I'm doing fantastic because Maryland's doing well. Orioles just won the AL East for the first time in 17 years. So I'm pretty happy.
Dodgers are in the playoffs.
Dodgers are in the playoffs.
The
Yankees.
Mets look like they have a nice future. Eventually.
Do they?
Rookie of the year.
Maryland coming off their second straight convincing road victory over a team they were underdogs against. That is unusual. How unusual, Andrew?
So I did a little bit of a deep dive on schedules, and this is more pertaining to the Syracuse game than the Indiana game. And I was looking for the last time Maryland football had beaten a Power 5 conference team, a Power 5 out-of-conference team on the road by a comfortable margin. And I have gotten to 1992, and I have not found one yet.
So that's pretty impressive stuff from Randy Edsall in Maryland. Dave wrote earlier today about Edsall bringing depth to the program. I think that's something we've talked about a lot here, and that came to fruition because Maryland has a lot of injuries still. I mean, it's not as if they're suddenly healthier than years before. It isn't as focused as it has been in years before. There hasn't been a run on quarterback injuries or cornerback injuries or wide receiver injuries. There have been some in the linebacking core, only one long term, so that's been a bit fortunate in that case. But I want to hear your guys' biggest impression from the win over Indiana. Andrew, you first.
Just that the team looked complete. They looked like a team that knew they were good and were confident going on the road to a place they'd never been before, and just obliterating a team that had beaten a top 20 SEC team on the road a week earlier. They looked like, I mean, when we coming into the season, we said, you know what, Maryland, we just want Maryland to be good. They don't need to be great. They're not going to make the playoffs. Just be good, and they looked good. And we talked about the injuries, especially to the linebacking core. When you have injuries to the linebacking core and you're going up against a running back like Tevin Coleman, you expect him to run for 250 yards, 4 touchdowns, and win the game on his own shoulders. And I expected Maryland to win, but I did expect Tevin Coleman to have a huge day, especially with the injuries. And outside of that 44-yard run in garbage time, he was basically silent.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the way it was for me, too. I really expected Coleman to have a big game, and that was before we found out all the defensive players for Maryland that were not going to be playing against Indiana on Saturday morning. I thought Maryland was going to win that game, but then when I found out all those defensive guys were going to be out, then I was really worried. And the way they just came out and stopped Coleman and the way they were executing on offense, Jay injured his wrist, and Caleb Rowe came in the second half. He didn't miss a beat whatsoever. They both played fantastic games, and across the board, it was just, one of the most complete Maryland games I've seen in a while. And for them to do that on the road and in their first Big Ten game, and to do it in back-to-back weeks, Willie, I mean, because they did it against Syracuse and then to come out and do it again against Indiana was just really impressive to me, and I think just kind of shows the caliber of this team this year.
I think even more importantly, or most importantly, outside of the James Madison game, which was, for all intents and purposes, a scrimmage, a warm-up, that it didn't matter, they've looked better every week. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that not a lot of teams can say, and I think it is a really, really positive sign.
I think that's a really great point, Andrew. I mean, South Florida, I think, was Maryland's worst game this season, even though it wasn't their only loss. They looked better against West Virginia, better still against Syracuse, and better again against Indiana. And I think one of the biggest changes, because the defense has been solid, I would say, throughout. West Virginia carved up an injured linebacking core, but I think, as we've talked about before, Clint Trickett and Kevin White are a really good combination. And West Virginia particularly, is now in the F/plus, however you want to pronounce it, rankings produced by Football Outsiders, which is an advanced statistic that throws in a bunch of things together. Sees who are the best teams in the nation. Maryland comes in at number 33, third in the Big Ten, behind Michigan State and Ohio State, respectively. West Virginia is in at 21. That West Virginia team has looked very good this season. I think a lot of Maryland fans, including myself, were sleeping on them before the season. They lost a lot from last year. They were a really bad team last year, but Clint Trickett has really turned that team around.
I mean, looking, you say that Maryland in the F/plus minus multiple sign, that they're third in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten has been really weird this year, and we haven't really talked about this in depth, but Maryland has at their schedule early in the year and saying, they have to play at Michigan, they have to play at Penn State, they have to, play Iowa, they have to play at Wisconsin, saying they get to play Penn State, they get to play Michigan. Penn State and Michigan look horrible. Penn State doesn't look as horrible as Michigan. They look shaky, and their shakiness finally came back to haunt them against perhaps the worst team in the Big Ten outside of Purdue and Northwestern. So that they get to go to that, go to State College with an expectation to win. They get to go to the Big House with an expectation to win. And I don't think that any Maryland fan could have said that coming into the season. They might legitimately be the best of the second rung of the Big Ten teams outside of Ohio State, Michigan State, and perhaps Nebraska and Wisconsin.
I think that's a very good point. And with Penn State specifically, Maryland matches up very well against them. Not to overlook Ohio State, we'll talk about them later on. But Penn State really has an awful offensive line, and what happened against Northwestern is that was exposed against a team that didn't have a very functional offense but had a very good defense that came to play that day. Christian Hackenberg had a lot of pressure in his face. Maryland is good at producing that kind of pressure, and I am feeling much more confident about that game than I was even 2 weeks ago.
A little tangent on Hackenberg. He's obviously very, very talented. He was a 5-star quarterback, and he has had arguably the best start of a career of any Penn State quarterback ever. But that offensive line, and they have to play another, I think, 8 games this year? Does that sound right? 8 conference games?
Yeah.
That offensive line has the potential to ruin him as a player. Penn State probably only gets 1 year of Christian Hackenberg after this year, and it's hard for a quarterback to take that kind of beating for an entire season and come back and retain his confidence and retain all of his talent and not just become a shell of himself. And if I was a Penn State fan, I would be very, very scared of wasting Christian Hackenberg.
And we've talked about previously, as Maryland fans, frustrations with James Franklin offensive systems. Our friends at Black Shoe Diaries have already called for offensive coordinator John Donovan, a former Maryland assistant coach, to be fired. Just 4 games into the season, just because his offense has been really
Pete?
I'm here.
Okay. I'll edit this part out, but I'll say, and surprisingly, unbelievably, Penn State is not the biggest mess in the Big Ten right now. Michigan is a freaking tire fire. I'm watching ESPN right now. There are students on the campus of Michigan protesting their athletic director. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, they have really looked, I would say, un-Michigan-like. And if Minnesota can come into the Big House and just play Michigan out of the ballpark, Maryland couldn't do the same. We'll have to see. There's a tough game against Ohio State first, but I think the biggest change for me throughout the week has been over the year. There's still been some offensive line concerns. I noticed against Milano Altamirano, both sprung big blocks that scored touchdowns throughout the game. But Maryland still has concerns along that unit beyond what I saw with my eyes. Stephon Diggs and Dion both had 100 in those two players to get them the ball.
See this broken up for you?
Yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah. Pete, we pretty much couldn't hear anything you just said. Like, you kept cutting in and out the whole time.
I don't. Yeah, I. Any of this?
I just heard any of this.
Yeah.
Well, I've been having trouble loading things all day, so I think that this is going to be an issue. I don't know if you guys want to do a quick one. I mean, understand me.
Did he just leave?
Yeah, which is probably good. So we can either try and start yet again, because it would be weird if Pete started the podcast and then didn't show up again. Or, I mean, I can't really – I got to go in like 20 minutes. Do you want me to try again tomorrow night?
I cannot do it tomorrow night.
All right.
Unless the only way I could do it tomorrow is if I'd have to do it like while I was in the car and driving, and that'd have to be sometime between like 6 and 7. Otherwise,
yeah, that seems –
at least 10.
That's just like, it's not going to work. I'm also probably going to be home late tomorrow. We'll figure it out this week. We'll do one eventually. They don't get posted until Thursday or Friday anyway, so.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal. I don't know what's going on with Pete, though, but yeah.
All right, well, this is worth a try. It was a nice conversation.
Yeah,
Anyway.
We'll have to continue it sometime.
All right, I'll see you, man.
All right, take care.